Ikenga. Ikenga. Oh, Ikenga. Shall yet see your sunrise, Ikenga. Shall yet see your sunrise.
The eastern region of Nigeria celebrated the inauguration of its newly elected parliament on December 23, 1959. The ruling party in the region, the National Congress for Nigeria and the Cameroons NCNC, celebrated another famous victory in a trend of dominance that had now spanned 13 years since the creation of the region in 1946. The region's new premier, a young medical doctor, Iheonukara Okpara, took the oath of office and began a tenure that propelled a man who had till this time operated under the shadow of his political mentor, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, into the forefront of governance. Okpara was no stranger to the corridors of power. For close to a decade by this time, he had served as a cabinet minister in the Eastern Region government in a number of portfolios. Now, he stood at the helm. As he walked side by side with his wife, Mrs. Adamu Okpara, at the inauguration ground, the gaiety and ceremony would belie the enormous task that lay ahead of the new premier. Administering a region of over 7 million ethnically diverse peoples in a densely populated area spanning over 90,000 square miles. By the end of his tenure, Okpara would have propelled himself into legendary status, leaving a legacy that many would cite as unsurpassed in the history of the former Eastern region, and many would say a template for governance in post-colonial Nigeria. A legacy of service and integrity built on a single-minded patriotic focus and drive that would set lofty markers for generations that followed. Join us as we explore the Okpara story, the man behind the legend, his triumphs and travails, his life's journey and motivations, including his inspiring lifelong formidable partnership with the equally legendary Mrs. Adamu Okpara. We hear the accounts of family, associates, friends and students whose recollections and accounts provide various pieces that all come together to form a tapestry of memorial for one of Africa's finest sons in a celebration of his life and legacy. This is the Okpara story.
Ikenga sunrise. I speak not in vain, Ikenga.
Okpara's ancestral origins were in the rustic settings of the village of Okpara in Afugiri, near Umuahia in the then Southern Protectorate of the recently amalgamated nation of Nigeria. His father, Okpara Sonye, was a masquerade craftsman and farmer, while his mother, Uyiridi Okpara, was a housewife and also a farmer. Okpara Sonye had been an early convert to Christianity from when the CMS and Methodist churches established a base at Ohonho from 1911. He had joined the Methodist Church, becoming an active evangelist, passionately engaged in the conversion of his kinsmen to the new faith. Around this same time, as a colonial infrastructure was being established and a new wage economy subsequently entrenched, he joined the services of the railways, working at a substation at Isiago. It was at this time that Okpara Sonye got married to a young woman from the neighboring village, Ofumezike Ofeme, whom he affectionately named Uyiridia, meaning in the image of her husband, which she duly answered throughout their marriage. The couple welcomed their first child on Christmas Day, 25th December 1920, and the joyful parents christened the newborn, Iheonukara Okpara. The young child grew in the loving confines of the family home at Okpara and was soon joined by younger brothers, Messionye and Amefule, in succession. The young Michael was said to be a lively, highly intelligent child with a maturity beyond his years. Even as a toddler, he showed an eagerness for education, probably spurred by the construction of a primary school at Okpara. His father had been reluctant for him to start his schooling too early, yet the 6-year-old Michael removed any doubt in his father's mind by counting in Igbo, using cowrie shells as counters. Okpara Sonye's shock turned to elation, and in a matter of days, Michael resumed classes at the Okpara Primary School in mid-1927.
Although described as a primary school, it was more akin to a nursery school, or ntakara, as was nicknamed in Igbo land, where pupils learnt the rudiments of the alphabet and numerals. By 1930, Michael was admitted to the Afugiri Central School, equivalent to today's primary school, where he spent the next 4 years. In January 1934, He was admitted to the Methodist College Uzoakoli. The school, founded as the Uzoakoli Institute in 1923, became a fully fledged secondary school in 1931. The school's founding principal, Reverend H.L.O. Williams, was in office at the time of his admission, running the school on a strict regime of discipline, educational achievement and character building. Williams had almost single-handedly built what was to become a centre of academic excellence from a clearing in the forest at Uzoakoli. He was said to remember the names of every one of the 300-plus students at the school. Some of Michael's contemporaries at the school include several names that were to loom large in Nigerian history in the following years. Michael Okpara was remembered by schoolmates as a keen all-round sportsman and exceptionally bright student. His performance soon earned him a Methodist scholarship, which took the burden off Okpara Asonye.
First year at Uzoakoli, Michael Okpara had pretty much set his sight on a career in engineering. However, much later he was captivated by the spectacle of the legendary Dr. Frank Davey performing surgery on a patient at the Uzoakoli hospital. Davey's deftness in executing the procedure and his explanation afterwards that the patient's life had been saved by the procedure immediately inspired the young Michael to pursue a medical career. His new career quest was acknowledged and encouraged by two of the most influential individuals during his studies at the school, Reverend Williams, the principal, and his wife, the biology teacher, fondly known to her students as Ma Williams, who once admonished Michael for throwing up while dissecting a lizard, asking him how he could cope as a doctor if he was squeamish about a lizard's innards. A further inspiration for the young man was his English and music teacher, Mr. G.T. Hart, a Nigerian who the young student found a veritable role model for his intellect, sartorial elegance, and dignified carriage. By the time Michael Okpara was in his sixth form and final year at Uzoakoli, there was no question that he would be one of the two candidates chosen. Thus it was that by 1940, he took the exams and passed with flying colors, gaining admission on merit. Michael proceeded to Yaba Higher College in January 1941 to start his studies in the pre-medicine / pre-veterinary course. He settled into life in Lagos, his very first time in the nation's capital. He was captivated by the charms of the big city, far removed from the sedate charms of Umuahia and Uzoakoli, the biggest towns around his immediate hometown environment. He made a number of friends amongst his schoolmates, such as Drs. Christopher Okoje, Justin Uku, and S.A.K. Ijoma, Professor Theo Gunlesi, and Dr. G.C. Mbanugo, the latter of whom became one of his closest friends, confidants, and political associates. The two men and other colleagues were constant study companions, as well as enjoying a social life that revolved around political conversations, old-fashioned banter, and a shared love of football.
He's always liked to watch football games. It's always been one of his favorite sports that he supported. As students, you don't have a lot of money, so they would stand and watch. They'll watch the turnstile, and then when the man at the turnstile gets distracted, either him or my dad would sneak past and wait on the other side. And then when it looks as if the coast is clear, they'll signal. There was a whistle. There was a way they whistled to each other when the coast was clear. And then they would whistle, and the second person was sneaking, and then they'll watch the football.
Yeah. Michael settled down into lodgings at the home of Chief Sholanke at 30 Ajay Street, Yaba. His widow, Madam Fabian Sholanke, was in fact my great-grandmother, and my father recalled meeting him at the time.
My first encounter with him was in December 1940. My mother took us, the children, from Degema, where my father was working as an inspector of police. We came to Lagos to spend the Christmas with my grandmother, that is the mother of my mother, at number 30 Ajay Street. I was a small boy by then, playing around. So a couple of days after we arrived in Lagos, she said, "You children should go and greet your Uncle Mike." So she took us to one of the rooms in her house. Who was this Uncle Michael? It was later Dr. Michael Iheonukara Okpara.
After successfully completing his first-year exams, Michael focused on medical studies. The program of study at Yaba Higher College followed the curriculum of the University of London, and in spite of the fact that its graduates, or licentiates as they were called, were required to carry out a completion course at the University of London, it was nonetheless a rigorous program of study that demanded diligent effort and application by students. Michael Okpara was fully conscious of the responsibility thrust upon him, and his natural academic brilliance and focus availed him. He successfully navigated the course of study with relative ease. Outside of his academic work, he was a hugely charismatic figure on campus, a trait reflected in his election as secretary of the Yaba High College Medical Students Association. On December 24, 1947, at the Christmas dance of the Medical Students Association, he happened on one of the medical examiners, one Dr. Freshwater, who probably in the well-lubricated spirit of the Yuletide could not contain his excitement and addressed Michael Okpara as Doctor, whispering his congratulations. Any doubt about the rather informal communication of his results dissolved on January 8, 1948, when the official results were published. And as Dr. Freshwater had additionally let out of the bag, Michael had performed excellently well. This was exactly 7 years after his admission. Michael was now a fully fledged medical doctor and could now be properly addressed, and loudly this time, as Dr. Michael Iheonukara Okpara. The news of his qualification had been received with jubilation at Iheonukara, his hometown, where he was accorded a hero's welcome. There were none prouder than Okpara Sonia and Yuridia, Michael's jubilant parents. His accreditation was not the only reason to celebrate. The young doctor had at the same time bought himself a car, an Austin 10 saloon, and even hired a driver, Lamidi Akoni, who accompanied him from Lagos to his hometown. Akoni was to be his faithful pilot for the next 20 years. Michael Okpara was employed by the Colonial Medical Department at Lagos in April 1948, where he spent a few months before transfer to Maiduguri in the northern region. There he served as a house officer under an expatriate senior medical officer, Dr. Hayworth, at the 150-bed General Hospital. This was an intense period of practice, during which the young doctor often worked alone on grueling 12-hour shifts, while Hayworth contended with extensive travel around the region, connected with the smallpox epidemic at the time. Dr. Okpara was to spend 7 months here before resigning his appointment in December 1948. His reasons were not complex. He barely survived on a salary of £25 a month, which even by the standards of the time was meagre. A view shared and voiced out quite loudly by his expatriate boss, Dr. Hayworth, wondering how the colonial government expected his house officer to survive on this sum, probably mindful of the fact that his expatriate counterparts earned considerably more. Additionally, Dr. Okpara had a burning desire to serve his own community. As said, he had been the first medical doctor from his area, and while he found practice in Maiduguri interesting, he believed his place was at home with his people. Thus, he returned to Iheonukara. The town was a small, semi-rural settlement, in spite of small government presence. There was neither electricity nor pipe-bomb water. Financial success aside, it brought to his community a value that was unquantifiable in monetary terms. He churned out a feverish work rate that consisted of sessions at his clinic, followed by extensive travel around neighboring communities dispensing healthcare. He also paid bi-weekly visits to the Methodist Hospital at Amachara, comprising a full day of surgery and a half day of consultations and ward rounds on Thursday. As a student at the Yaba High College, Dr. Okpara had been a member of the Bende Division Literary Youth Association, and during his holidays would attend its meetings. In attendance on one of these occasions was a young teacher from the neighboring community of Ntalakwoboro in Ukwana called Adam Makano. Who was she?
I'm from Ikwano. I grew up as a little girl doing 6 miles a day from my home to the school where I attended. And from there, up till where I am today.
After her training at the Women's Training College Umuahia, Adamma taught at the Ovim Girls' School until 1944. She then taught for 2 years at her alma mater, the Women's Training College Umuahia, from 1944 to 1948. While the Literary Youth Association event of 1943 had been their first meeting, the two had no interaction at this event. Things were to change very soon.
My husband, he just saw me at the railway station Umuahia. We crossed each other 3 times. If I go this way, he went that way. Whenever I wanted to go to collect my luggage, he would not know Hindi. We didn't know each other. He was looking for something and I was looking for my own. He came. We met 3 times at the railway station Umuahia. At the time, it was functioning. That was how we started. Then after that, he started to make inquiries about me, and from there on, you find me here.
The couple courted for 6 years from 1943 until their marriage at the Methodist Church Mission Hill, Umuahia, on October 29, 1949. They soon settled into blissful married life at Umuahia, where Dr. Okpara continued his medical practice. Mrs. Adama Okpara, as she had now become, was Dr. Okpara's partner in the very truest sense of the word. She was without question his closest confidant.
My husband, as a doctor, he was practicing at Umuahia, so we were living there.
While the couple were steeped in traditional conservative values, Mrs. Okpara was a highly intelligent, strong personality, and her husband had nothing but the greatest of respect for this confident, beautiful and strong woman. Dr. Okpara himself testified to her being a source of strength and encouragement to him during his medical studies. He was to boldly declare that he could not have achieved the successes he enjoyed without the woman that became his wife. The marriage was soon blessed with children, the first being Nnawihe, their first son, Chinyere, their first daughter, Uzodimma, the second son, Enyenaya, the fourth son, Ugongwa, their second daughter, and Ijoma, their third daughter.
He was always happy. Who is not happy when a child is born? He was happy, and he had them the way God planned it for him. The boys and girls all mixed, not only one sex.
Dr. Okpara was a hands-on father and husband, completely devoted to his family.
He was a gifted man, all round. There is no area you talk about or you walk about that he will not show you how it is done.
Mrs. Okpara ceased her teaching career and became a full-time housewife, while her husband focused on his medical practice.
I wasn't working. It wasn't as it is now. Minister's wife working and you try to look after the house and the children. See that they go to school, they do all that they are required to do. That was different in those days, more interesting.
He had intended that at some point he would proceed to a specialist course based on the limitations of the licentiate qualifications obtained from the Yaba Higher College. However, fate was to intervene, and his life was to take on a significantly different turn of circumstances.
On the national stage, the years 1949 to 1951 saw various overarching events that were to have a far-reaching effect on Nigeria's political landscape. Notable amongst these were the Eva Valley Miners Massacre of 1949, where 22 persons were shot dead by the colonial police at the Enugu coal mines, an incident that served to briefly galvanize the various indigenous political forces into a united front. In the following year, 1950, for the very first time in Nigerian history, women in the western and eastern regions exercised the right to vote and be voted for, and the first elected female, Henrietta Lawson, emerged from the Lagos County elections. January 1950 also saw the opening of the first constitutional conference in Nigerian history, held at Ibadan, where far-reaching decisions relating to the nation's political structure were made, leading to the enactment of the 1951 Constitution, midwifed by then-Governor John McPherson. This constitution provided for greater regional autonomy and elections into the regional Houses of Assembly created 5 years earlier by the Richards Constitution of 1946. In the wake of this constitution, the second generation of political parties were formed, joining the first set, which notably included the National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons, NCNC, first led by the legendary nationalist Herbert Macaulay, and later by Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe. New parties formed included the Northern People's Congress, NPC, jointly led by Sir Ahmadu Bello and Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, the Action Group, AG, led by Chief Obafemi Awolowo, and the Northern Elements Progressive Union, NEPU, led by Malam Aminu Kano. The launch of these three parties, alongside several smaller parties, heralded the classic stage of Nigerian partisan politics, and the trends set then were to have far-reaching consequences on the nation's history. Dr. Michael Okpara was an avid witness to these events. As far back as 1943, while a student at the Yabahaya College, he had come under the spell of a man who would become his political mentor, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe. He and his close friend, G.C. Mbanugo, had first witnessed the legend in action at a rally in Lagos and been captivated by his fiery oratory. The duo became avid readers of Dr. Azikiwe's West African Pilot newspaper, and although they could not engage in political activity as students of the college, they became staunch disciples of the great Zik, a devotion that was to last throughout their lives.
So, he was part of the meetings, the rallies that were taking place, and then Zik, of course, was leading those demands. The Zik papers, were using the papers to promote the issues of freedom, anti-colonialism, and so on. And Dr. Okpara, I think, was there when they formed the NCNC, but as a student.
Dr. Okpara was to make a bold statement of his commitment to the politics and vision of the NCNC when he stood out as one of the young revolutionaries who bore the coffin of the deceased Herbert Macaulay through the streets of Lagos on the day of his funeral in 1946. By 1949, while settled into family and professional life, Dr. Okpara immersed himself in community work, especially joining the Bender Divisional Union, a community association focused on development and mobilization with roots spread across the old Bender Division. By 1950, he had become an active and visible member of the association, ferrying the chairman of the time, Oji Iheonukara, in his car around the division on union business. It was no surprise that by 1951, Dr. Okpara was elected as president.
In 1951, I remember my father taking me to his clinic in Umaya, on a number of occasions. But while he was doing that, his interest in politics, that interest was still fired up. And that was when he formally organized the Bender Union.
His inevitable entry into political activism had occurred earlier in 1949 at a rally in protest at the massacre of miners at Iva Valley, referred to earlier. Whilst not scheduled to speak at the event, he had been incensed by the seeming timidity of those who spoke, which he correctly ascribed to the presence of plainclothes colonial police operatives in the audience. Dr. Okpara mounted the stage and delivered a rousing speech, challenging the reticent conduct of the speakers before him. He was promptly arrested after the event and released subject to reporting conditions that lasted for 8 days. This event cemented his reputation as a fearless activist and a man of the people. Freed from his engagement with the colonial civil service, which barred its staff from political activity, he had initially joined the National African Party, NAP, serving as its vice president, with newly qualified lawyer Chief Jaja Wachuku as its president. He soon left NAP and joined the Umuahia branch of the NCNC. After representing the branch at the National Convention of the party at Kano in 1951, he was elected chairman of the branch in the same year. Dr. Okpara's sheer energy and intellectual capacity was recognized by the party hierarchy, especially Dr. Azikiwe, who became an admirer of the young talent, and his ascendancy within the ranks of the NCNC assumed rapid pace.
Union, through which he and other people entered the NCNC. So a medical doctor with a very humanist spirit, a spirit that wanted freedom.
With the launch of partisan politics heralded by the Macpherson Constitution, M.I. Okpara and 2 others were put forward by the NCNC as candidates in the 1951 elections for membership of the Eastern Nigeria Regional House of Assembly. M.I. Okpara emerged victorious by a huge tally in the ensuing elections, elected as one of the members for the Bender constituency. By February 1952, he was appointed a minister without portfolio in the Eastern Region Cabinet, headed by Dr. Eyoita, the leader of government business for the region. This signaled the end of this phase of Dr. Okpara's medical practice and the beginning of what was to become an iconic career in politics and public service.
Yes, Dr. Okpara was a very forthright person. He wasn't a typical politician because he spoke his mind. With him, he told you what he thinks, whether it looks favorable or not. And then he had a passion in doing the things he wanted to do. His service to Eastern Nigeria, in any case, was a very passionate one.
One of his first assignments was the 1953 Eastern Region Census, a major undertaking that involved organization of logistics and public enlightenment. However, an event was to occur in the same year that sorely tested the erstwhile unity of the NCNC, and Iheonukara Okpara found himself involved by circumstance. This was the Eastern Region Crisis of 1952-1953. The genesis of this was that the NCNC, having fairly consolidated its hold on the Eastern Region by winning 65 of the 84 seats contested, felt itself well placed to take control of the Western Region House of Assembly. Yet while the NCNC won all the Lagos seats to a total of 36 seats, Lagos then being part of the Western Region, the Action Group won 44 out of the 85 seats contested. However, this did not amount to the two-thirds majority required for victory. The deadlock was resolved when a number of independent candidates, such as Adisa Akiloye and Adeola Odutola, aligned with the Action Group, giving it the 49 seats required for victory in the elections. The NCNC felt a sense of grievance at these results. However, the outcome was conclusive, but then it got worse. While Dr. Azikiwe had been elected as member for Lagos, thus making him eligible on the electoral college system of the time to be voted for to ascend to the Federal House of Representatives, the Action Group in the further slate of hand voted for two other NCNC candidates, Abubakar Alorinimbe and Adeleke Adedoyin, to proceed to the Federal House of Representatives. The two said members confounded their party leader by neither agreeing to step down nor allowing him to go in their stead. By this result, Dr. Azikiwe was reduced to the post of leader of the opposition in the Western House of Assembly, which in truth was a comparatively low-profile, inconsequential position. Things were to deteriorate within the NCNC. Later on, at the NCNC convention in Jos in December 1952, Dr. Azikiwe required all 9 regional ministers in the Eastern Region, including Dr. Eyoita, to submit their resignations towards reappointment by the party, which they did. However, 6 of them, including Dr. Eyoita, E.I. Uli, S.W. Ubani Okoma, R.I. Uzoma, E. Koripamo, and S.J. Una, discovered that they would not be reappointed. Thus, they informed the Lieutenant Governor overnight of the withdrawal of their resignations. 2 ministers who maintained their resignations were Dr. Michael Okpara and MC Ogwo. A vote of no confidence in the regional leadership was moved and passed by 60 to 13 at the conference. The 6 ministers who withdrew their resignations became known as the sit-tight ministers, who later formed the Nigerian Independence Party, NIP. They were to be joined by Dr. Jaja Wachukwu, Dr. Akanu Ibiam, and Dr. Udoma, who had resigned from the NCNC in protest.
An inter-party rivalry within the Eastern Region now ensued between the NCNC and the admittedly smaller NIP, which had merged with Dr. Alvan Ikoku's United National Party. Dr. Azikiwe's West African pilot even ascribed derogatory nickname the Nippers to members of the NIP. Fresh elections for the Eastern House of Assembly were held in December 1953. The NCNC won with a landslide and saw Dr. Azikiwe return to power as Premier of the Eastern Region. In the aftermath of this crisis, Dr. Okpara remained within the NCNC structure.
A bold and true lieutenant who would even tell his leader in selected words if the leader was going wrong at any point in time. And so he and Dr. Azikiwe got on very well. The first test was when there was the Iheonukara crisis in 1952, and then NCNC asked the Eastern ministers to resign from government so that the House would be dissolved and Zik re-elected, because Zik went to Lagos. He could not get to the Western House of Assembly. He was thrown out by Awolowo, and so we said Zik should come to the East, his hometown. The party asked Eyoita, who was the leader of government business, to resign with his cabinet, so that Zik, as the leader of the party, would contest and be appointed the head of the government. And then Eyoita refused to act. And then his ministers were asked to resign. Some ministers refused to resign in obedience to Eyoita. But Dr. Okpara, Ogwo, and MC Ogwo, and a few others were loyal enough to offer their resignation. And so when eventually the majority of the House, forced a dissolution of the House of Assembly, and then Utah and his people lost their seats. Okpara contested election, and then Zeke contested. Zeke now became the leader of government, later to be the head of government. And he remembered his close relationship with Okpara. He remembered Okpara's loyalty to him. He remembered Okpara's faithfulness to the party. And so that warm relationship continued.
An impact of the departure of some of these admittedly senior members of the party was that he ascended further up the party hierarchy, and upon Dr. Azikiwe's assumption of office as Premier, he was assigned the health portfolio in 1954. The Eastern Region Cabinet comprised a genre of highly gifted, motivated technocrats led by Dr. Azikiwe himself. By 1955, this was crucial as the region had the lowest internally generated revenue among the three regions. It needed their energies. Spearheaded by Dr. Azikiwe and Sir Louis Udumegu Ojukwu, who toured Europe and North America marketing the region, the leadership soon embarked on an investment drive, actively seeking foreign and indigenous investment in the region. By that same year, the region invested £7,500,000 in various sectors of development, pursuant to the 1945-1955 National Plan. M.I. Okpara, the Health Minister, brought what was to be widely acknowledged as his legendary energy and drive to the fore. He devised a comprehensive healthcare plan for the region, focused on investment in primary healthcare, an area in which he had deep insight. His experience of the dearth of investment in healthcare infrastructure by the colonial authorities grounded the targets he set for himself. He focused on the control of illnesses like leprosy and guinea worm. In 1954 alone, his ministry spearheaded a campaign to combat the endemic spread of the disease yaws. In conjunction with the World Health Organization and UNICEF, a treatment center was set up at Nsukka, and by the end of the year, 264,000 patients had been treated, with 80,000 examined on follow-up treatment, virtually eradicating the disease in the region. In the ensuing years, mass vaccination campaigns were embarked upon. An annual sum of £1.2 million was invested in healthcare in the region during his 3-year tenure, which was 18% of the region's total budget, the second highest allocation after education. The work he and his successors embarked upon eventually resulted in an almost 200% increase in regional healthcare capacity, specifically 495,000 outpatients and 58,000 inpatients.
As far back as 1953 or 1954, Dr. M.I. Okpara was the Minister of Health, while my father was the Minister of Labor. But what was interesting about that time was that Dr. M.I. Okpara had also written the NCNC's party's manifesto on health. And when he became the Minister of Health subsequently, he went on to implement some of the policies and programs that were contained in that manifesto.
In 1957, M.I. Okpara was appointed Minister for Production, a capacity in which he supervised the Eastern Nigeria Development Corporation, ENDC. The ENDC worked alongside the Eastern Nigerian Marketing Board, ENMB, and the Eastern Nigerian Finance Corporation, ENFC. The ENMB was responsible for the management of the region's cash or export crops. Profits from the sales of export produce would be transferred to the ENDC for investment in production infrastructure. Dr. Okpara also served as chairman of the Eastern Nigerian Working Committee of the NCNC from 1955 to 1957. By 1959, having cut his teeth in this most strategic of ministries, he was assigned the agriculture portfolio in the same year. This was a pivotal time in the region's economic history. Its main source of revenue was agricultural produce, especially palm produce. However, in 1956, a major development occurred that was to impact the nation's economic fortunes for years to come. This was the discovery of commercial quantities of crude oil at Olebiri in the Niger Delta of the Eastern region. This discovery was positioned to transform the Eastern region's economic fortunes until a change in the revenue allocation formula took place at the Lancaster Gate Constitutional Conference of 1957. Additionally, Shell Darcy Petroleum, which had spearheaded the discovery of oil, were in the process of constructing a refinery at Alese Eleme in the region. The company had sought 100% ownership of the facility. However, Iheonukara and S.E. Imoke harbored reservations about this, which they promptly addressed to the central government.
When oil was discovered in Oloibiri, two things happened that struck me. One of them was that the federal government changed the revenue sharing formula. So there was a constitutional conference where in 1957 where the revenue sharing formula was amended because of as a result of the discovery of oil in the Eastern region. And that derivation formula was immediately changed to the disadvantage of the region. We're still stuck with that challenge till today. But beyond that, I recall that Shell tried very hard to make sure that the federal government did not participate in the development of a refinery. I recall that Dr. Iheonukara Okpara and my late father went to Lagos to meet with the Prime Minister Abubakar Tafawa Balewa to advise that, listen, whatever the case may be, please do not submit to Shell's proposition. Okay, the government must invest in refining, and this they did subsequently.
Meanwhile, as a result of the constitutional conferences that had ensued since 1950, there had been fast-paced developments towards independence. Specifically, on March 27, 1957, Chief Samuel Akintola of the Action Group moved a motion on the floor of the House for independence in 1957. While a previous motion had been moved unsuccessfully by his party colleague, Chief Anthony Enahoro, in 1953, this motion was supported by all main parties and carried on March 31, 1957, with an amendment for independence by 1959. At the Lancaster Gate Conference of May 1957, all the political parties moved for independence by April 1960, but the British Secretary for the Colonies vetoed this. However, the unified face of the Nigerian political actors prevailed, and independence was eventually agreed for October 1, 1960. In the following year, 1958, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa was appointed Federal Prime Minister. Also, the Southern Cameroons, which had been part of the Eastern region, was granted regional autonomy. Federal elections for an independent Nigeria were scheduled for December 12, 1959. Previously in alliance with the MPC from 1954, the NCNC now aligned with NEPU. The elections held on December 12, 1959 as arranged, and by the next day, the detailed results showed that while the NCNC had the highest total votes in numerical terms, the representational system was such that the MPC garnered a higher total of parliamentary seats with 1,922,179 votes, amounting to 25.2% of votes cast, while the NCNC had actually garnered 2,594,577 votes and 34% of the votes cast. It appeared that the MPC had the edge in total votes counted. However, there was no outright majority. So once again, intricate horse trading ensued between the parties. The NCNC's Festus Okotie-Eboh had been vehemently against an AG-NCNC coalition. In the final analysis, the NCNC re-entered into a coalition with the MPC after a period of brief negotiation. James Robertson, as Governor General on 14 December, invited Tafawa Balewa to form a government, and by the 16th of December 1966, this was fulfilled. On Friday, January 15, 1960, a motion for Nigeria's independence was moved in the House of Representatives and unanimously passed, and October 1, 1960 was fixed as Independence Day. By the coalition agreement with the MPC, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa would be Prime Minister, while Dr. Azikiwe became Governor General and Ceremonial Head of State. This created a vacuum in the premiership of the Eastern region. In the minds of observers, there were a number of possible successors, such as Raymond Njoku or Dr. Kingsley Mbadiwe. However, Dr. Azikiwe decided upon one of his younger lieutenants to occupy this position. This was Dr. Michael Iheonukara Okpara.
But in terms of the Eastern Nigeria government at the time, under Zik was number one, the premier, Mbono Ojike number two, Okpara was in reality number three in the system. Then the Ojike incident, when he was forced to resign through the mismanagement of an inquiry into alleged corruption, and Okpara was very displeased about the way the matter was handled. He and Zik had a period when they didn't get on, but the foster certain inquiry into the ACB, which was targeted at Zik, and the role Okpara played in getting the party out of that sort of led to he and Zik reconciling again. So, in reality, Okpara was number 2. That is not to say that there were not contestants. Many people were unhappy. Akpabio, of course, thought it should have been. There was G.E. Okeke, the Minister of Education, who thought it could have been. But Zik has to be commended for his insights, appointing Dr. Okpara to take over from him.
Every other thing was put aside. The Zik and other people, they found my husband good enough to follow them. There must be something he saw. He saw something in him. I'm not here to praise my husband. That thing he saw, others saw it too. Right from the time he was a schoolboy, he was a brilliant man. And Zik saw that. Once or twice he met him. So he liked him and picked him up to work with him.
While he was relatively younger than most members of the party hierarchy, it has to be repeated that with the departure of certain members and the resignation and later demise of Chief Mbono Ojike, Dr. Okpara moved into the number 2 position in the party hierarchy after Dr. Azikiwe. Thus, on December 23, 1959, His Excellency Dr. M.I. Okpara was sworn into office as Premier of the Eastern Region and Head of Government.
Our oil, ore and coal for an integrated iron and steel industry. Altogether, the future is bright for industry in the Eastern Region.
He later appointed Sir Akanu Ibiam as Governor of the region a year later, on December 15, 1960, replacing the last British Lieutenant Governor, Sir Clement Pleece. This was one of the few decisions he was ever to make without consulting his wife. The new Premier had hardly been sworn in when he swung into action. He assembled a cabinet of highly talented and focused individuals from all over the region to various portfolios.
I was in the civil service all along. But in 1959, I was sent abroad to London for a course of studies. And immediately I returned at the end of 1960. I was posted to his office as his confidential secretary. That was my first encounter with him.
In response, the Premier says that he is the servant of his people, and no servant is greater than his master.
Philosophy of the NCNC under Zik was, well, I think the pilot, Zik's main newspaper, showed the light, and the people will find their way. Dr. Okpara, in his own case, had a philosophy of joining the people to lead the way, lead them to find their way. He didn't merely show the light, he got down to the ground and joined the people and led them to find their way.
His training as a medical doctor made him humanistic. So he had a human philosophy. So, and what humanism does is that humanism tells you that development must be centered about human beings, not about things, or brick and mortar. It must be about the development of the individual.
M.I. Okpara was a nationalist. He wasn't a regional leader, and a lot of them were nationalists.
You could always think of Zik as a guy you can do a deal with. Okpara will bring strength to deal with you without failing to realize that politics is the art of the possible.
So clearly, his style of governance was one, his views were very nationalistic. Secondly, he was focused on development of the region.
Well, there were two parts of his approach to public life. He thought the people were important. Even in his governance, he had consultative assemblies and so on, through which he consulted, the citizens at various levels, developed a rapport with different leaders, in his party, in his government, and outside that. And he consulted this, but he also held what we now call town hall meetings from time to time. That was because he believed that serving the people was really the important call to duty, as it were. And not only serving the people, but if you are going to serve them, you had better know what it is they want. And you arrange everything you are doing in governance according to what the people want. And that was why he proved as successful and as popular as he did.
Apart from the normal bureaucratic planning, Dr. Okpara adopted the legacy of the Azikiwe premiership by engaging in dialogue and partnership with the private sector. Thus, the Conference of Leading Persons of the Eastern Region was convened and served as a developmental think tank and investment forum, bringing together the public and private sectors in partnership for regional development. 5 meetings of this think tank were to hold between April 1960 and December 1965.
Agriculture was the base of foreign exchange earning as at that time. The Eastern region was the poorest among the 3 main regions. The Eastern region made its money from palm produce. That's palm oil and palm kernel. As at 1963, the total amount of contribution to the national forest earning of the whole country, palm produce brought in about 17%, which is low. And that 17%, which was about 30 million pounds, was shared between the Eastern region and the Western region, because while the Eastern region palm produce was based in palm oil, the Western region was focused more on palm kernels. So the whole palm produce, it was shared. So when you share that between the two, 17% between the two, you will find out that what we got as for Eastern region was so small to be able to achieve anything. But that was what pushed Dr. Okpara into engaging in massive agricultural and industrial development projects.
The Okpara Revolution commenced with one of its most visible outcomes within the industrial and agricultural sectors. He underlined his intent with a speech in 1960, in which he stated unequivocally, "For too long, the economy of Eastern Nigeria has remained lopsided with emphasis on education and health services. Henceforth, my government shall shift emphasis from social services to industrial, agricultural, and general economic development of the region." If there was any confusion as to his intention, this was underlined further in a quote from Chief K.O.K. Onyoha, Publicity Secretary of the ENDC. The Premier swore that every square inch of Eastern Nigeria's land must have been put into useful agricultural undertaking in 10 years' time. If the ordinarily efficient civil service bureaucracy believed the new Premier would toe the line of slow-laboured progress, they were soon to be shaken into reality. Onyoha continued saying, "He is too much in for progress, and the traditional time-wasting of the civil service and red tapeism does not go with him." He forcefully pushed his lieutenants into innovative thinking and soon inspired them into his vision. His most radical move, the establishment of multiple farm settlements driven by the ENDC, now headed by his close friend Dr. G.C. Mbanugo, with Bob Ugwago as secretary, soon absorbed thousands of unemployed graduates churned out from the region's institutions.
So in a short while, you had the Boki farm settlement, you had Umuahia North, Umuahia South, Igbariam farm settlement, You had Egbema, Ohaji Egbema. Everywhere they build these farm settlements.
You had palm plantation, cashew plantations, all over the place.
You have the Calabar rubber estate, Calaro, and of course you had the processing plant.
Simultaneously, as manufacturing was just growing rapidly in the eastern region, agriculture was also growing.
His humanity was outstanding, in which he said that while we are trying to grow more agricultural products so that we will shore up our revenue base, it is not going to be to the detriment of our people.
And he was advising people, each person, if you have a backyard, if you grow whatever you can grow there. Whatever you grow in your compound, you don't have to buy.
We should also see to it that whatever we are producing is also leading to ensuring self-sufficiency in food production so that our people will have food on their table.
An egg for a penny, available to every child. It was a basic, fundamental thesis in food security.
So the cost of living was relatively low in the old eastern region because everybody was producing part of what they were eating.
This was not mere lip service. From 1960 and in ensuing years within the ambit of the region's 1962 to 1968 development plan, huge investments in agriculture were witnessed. The region's total budget for the plan period was £36,821,000. Within this, the lion's share of £22,784,000 was allocated for tree crops towards export, while food crops followed with £2,795,000. The returns were soon clearly seen. The ENDC established large-scale and viable cocoa estates at Ubani Beku, Uzitem, Arochukwu, Ikom, Abia, Boje, and Bendegayu. Oil palm estates were established in the Calabar province, the Kalaro and Kwa Falls estates, as well as Elele, Amakabam, Uzitem, Arochukwu, Mporo, Eket, Ikom, and the Were division. 90 pioneer oil mills were established across the region. Other establishments included rubber plantations at Amakabam, cashew estates at Ajale and Owe, and a piggery and sheep pen at Obudu, where the town was to host the administration's establishment of the Obudu Cattle Ranch. Additionally, several farming settlements for the production of food crops were established at different locations around the region, such as Nsube, Ubariam, Uzowane, Ulona, and Ikwo.
He had the Agri Credit Scheme, which provided credit for people to farm. He also had the farmers' cooperatives. There was rules about civil servants, farming. Then you come into industrial development.
When he set up farm settlements, he was able to take people off the street, increase employment by establishing industries everywhere, from Golden Guinea and all that. You could see that people were employed.
If you look at agriculture, the agriculture was holistic. Not only rubber estates, you also had a Budu ranch. You would not realize that the plan for Budu, right in the 60s, was to produce butter, cheese, and milk. This was the plan for Budu.
The region soon produced enough food to make it entirely self-sufficient in fruit production, with huge surpluses that resulted in reduction in food prices. Yet, this did produce some aberrations in low prices and reduced profitability for individual producers. The Premier's nimbleness of mind and innovative solution-oriented mindset were brought to play in an incident concerning a poultry farmer who had found himself with a surplus of eggs for which he could find no buyers. He angrily made his way to the State House, and when his loud protest attracted the Premier's attention, the poultry farmer was reputed to have said to the Premier, "You said we should grow chickens and produce eggs. Well, I have done so, and I am with surplus eggs no one is buying. So I decided to bring them to you." Dr. Okpara, rather than take offense at the man's boldness, saw an opportunity. He ordered the establishment of the Egg Marketing Organization with the task of buying up all surplus eggs that were then stored in purpose-built refrigerated storage units all over the region. They were then supplied to boarding schools in the region and fed to students. The second area of emphasis was industrial production. This was managed both by the ENDC and the Regional Ministry of Commerce. A comprehensive industrial plan was meticulously conceived, and the regional government consulted extensively with private indigenous investors, as well as actively soliciting foreign direct investment. Dr. Okpara was to lead from the front in this regard, following on from the example begun by Dr. Azikiwe and Sir Louis Odumegwu in the early 1950s. He embarked on an extensive but ultimately productive international tour, selling the region's potential to institutional investors. His efforts were soon to yield exponential dividends. New industries sprang up in the region, almost like magic. These included the Pepsi-Cola and Minerals factory at Onitsha, the 3 million Eastern Michelin tire factory at Port Harcourt, the Niger Gas factory and Niger Steel factory both at Emene Enugu, all joint venture outcomes of his travels, the Golden Guinea Brewery at Umuahia, the Opobo Boat Yard, the Niger Cement factory in Kalago, Niger Steel factory, and the modern Nigerian ceramic industries Umuahia, the modern shoe industries Owerri, Nigerian aluminium products, the Onitsha textile mills, and the Abakaliki rice mills, amongst many others. Also, the Eastern Nigerian Glass Factory, Port Harcourt, which was the very first of its kind in Central and West Africa. The government underlined its industrial strategy with the construction of the Transamadi industrial layout in Port Harcourt to add to others at Enugu, Onitsha, and Aba. As part of the new 1962 to 1968 economic plan, the government also allocated £10 million for investment in the Port Harcourt refinery project. In its 1962 to 1968 plan, the government had set itself a target to increase industrial output from the 1957 figure of 1.61 million to several times that figure, which it achieved with ease, increasing industrial output by 300% by 1965.
His vision was from Port Harcourt to Enugu would be one industrial conurbation, just industries all over, as you would have in Western societies. He regarded the whole of Eastern Nigeria as his one constituency, which was why the industrial things he was developing in Transamadi, the things he developed in Umuahia was there, and the things he developed in Aba was there, and then the things he developed in Emene, in Enugu. The whole idea was ultimately the industries would grow all along. But he did not abandon the non-Igbo areas.
In Cross River, Akwa Ibom area, because we were the sparser part of the region, you could have large-scale plantations. So you had the Dunlop oil plantation, you had the rubber plantations and all that on a very large scale. In Owerri, he developed a shoe factory.
You had the Calabar Cement Factory, which is one of the best cements in this country. So you had the Niger Cement in Kalago.
Then there was the Niger Gas. Then there was the Niger Steel. Before the federal government start thinking about Ajokuta Steel Rolling Mill, Oshogbo, Kasena, and Warri Steel Rolling Mill, there was Niger Steel in Emene.
And all these things were done in a period of 4 or 5 years. And everybody wanted to be part of Eastern Nigeria and the development in Eastern Nigeria.
Then you have factory and glass industry in Aba. Then there was a modern ceramics industries in Umuahia. Then the man came up, the first indigenous brewery in Africa was Golden Guinea Breweries in 1961.
He also knew that you needed foreign investment and so on. And if foreign people are to come and visit you regularly, as consultants, as whatever, or even as investors, then you have to have first-class hotels where they can stay. He developed the presidential hotel in Port Harcourt and the presidential hotel in Enugu. It's unfortunate that mismanagement ruined the one in Enugu, but the presidential hotel in Port Harcourt was part of Okpara's achievement.
He made his mark. He performed wonderfully. And he was a disciplined man, highly disciplined man.
Apart from the industrial projects listed above, the Eastern region government embarked upon a swathe of commercial ventures, which included the prestigious presidential hotels at Port Harcourt and Enugu, and catering rest houses at Enugu, Aba, Afikpo, Onitsha, Umuahia, and Nsukka. It also established the Eastern Nigerian Construction and Furniture Company, ECFC, which was engaged in fulfilling the government's infrastructural projects, ranging from civil engineering projects like road and building construction to the interior decoration of government assets. The Okpara administration established the Cooperative Bank of Eastern Nigeria and Universal Insurance Limited. It increased investment in the inherited African Continental Bank, previously owned by Dr. Azikiwe and acquired by the then Eastern Region government in the aftermath of the Foster Sutton Inquiry of 1956. Although the administration had stated its intention to decrease the education sector's share of the budget, it did not otherwise shirk its responsibilities. In fact, actual year-on-year expenditure increased substantially before and within the planned period. While 1.7 million was invested between 1962 and 1963, the 1962 to 1968 plan made broad provisions for the investment of 29.9 million for the 6-year plan period. It is to be recalled that the University of Nigeria was completed in 1960 during the administration's tenure. In healthcare, the administration invested £3.2 million in infrastructure expansion, including the establishment of rural health centers all across the region, polyclinics in existing institutions, and immunization programs. The administration established Africa's second television station at Enugu in 1960. A few months after the first, the Western Nigeria Television Service was established at Ibadan in 1959.
After independence, I got back to Aba. Getting back to Aba, I got invitation from ENBC, Eastern Nigeria Broadcasting Corporation. That was the second television station in Nigeria. But first station was Western Nigeria Television Service. Western Nigeria, what I was first in Africa, they called themselves West in Africa when they started Western Nigeria Television in Ibadan. Then Eastern region, when I came now, we started this one now, which invited me to join ENBC. We told them, well, now it's second to none. The one they call WNTV, first in Africa. Then we started the one at Enugu in Eastern region, called Eastern Nigeria Broadcasting Service, ENBC. We said second to none. That was when I started my revolution, now when I was employed as a senior producer.
M.I. Okpara's influence was pervasive over all aspects of governance. His positive, result-oriented mindset attracted like-minded talents to government. On many occasions, he would actively headhunt those he felt would be a human asset to the administration, an example of which was his persistence in convincing one of the region's finest legal minds to join the judiciary. This was Justice Anthony Aniagolo, later to become a justice of the Supreme Court.
But I vaguely remember a procession of cars streaming into my father's house in Enugu at the time. My father was a very successful lawyer, and there was considerable pressure on him from both Dr. Okpara and the Chief Justice of Eastern Region at the time, Sir Louis Mbanefo, to become a High Court judge. And my father just didn't see the reason why he should become a High Court judge, given that he was very successful as a lawyer and was now being told to become a salaried worker. I mean, but he was a very good lawyer, very well educated, very well exposed, and had established himself as a very credible legal mind in the pantheon of sort of lawyers in Nigeria at the time. So Okpara was almost desperate to get him to be a judge in order to make the judiciary more authentic. And so I remember the cars a number of times coming to the house, and I remember this figure, who was the kind of person who would not step out of a car, but who would emerge from a car. That was Dr. Okpara for you. And I remember him sort of patting my head and the heads of my, brothers and sisters and so on. And that's my first recollection of him.
These are but a sample of the major landmarks of the Eastern Nigerian developmental revolution of the 1960s, the culmination of meticulous planning and focused, determined and honest implementation. It was not magic. It was simply planning, integrity and hard work. The man at the forefront of this revolution walked tall, and why not? By 1965, the regional economy was one of the fastest growing in the world. From what had been the poorest of the nation's regions in the 1950s, it had grown into a veritable African tiger economy, and it was just getting started.
He was able to use cocoa, palm oil, and a few other products locally to run one of the fastest growing economies in the world.
Actually, I pointed it out first in a public lecture I gave. I stumbled on a study at the Michigan State University. Some economists from there came to Eastern Nigeria, did a role they did, went to other parts of Nigeria, and then came out. I couldn't believe what was going on in Eastern Nigeria. In fact, that study was in 1964. And that's when they pronounced that Eastern Nigeria at that time was the fastest growing economy. I stumbled on it, and I first, many of the people who quote it don't know where it comes from. But it was actually a study by a research group from the US. His competitors, as he saw it, was South Korea and all these Southeast Asian countries, including Malaysia. Well, see where they are, see where where we are. If Okpara's vision had been pursued without the interruption of the Civil War, so that we would be where Malaysia and South Korea are, because we were ahead of them.
Dr. Okpara's robust style of governance and the near miraculous outcomes of his stewardship earned him the loyalty and admiration of his region's citizens and the nickname MI Power. It was fitting. He was a man driven by a commitment to service and a sense of personal pride and the pursuit of legacy.
That he was nicknamed MI Power. Whatever he sets his hands on, which is good, he will see to it that it is done properly.
He'd seen the deprivation of his people at the grassroots in the midst of so much unharnessed plenty. It was his duty to change that, and for his people, he delivered.
Okpara took over at a time when there were no institutions.
Even though the eastern region was the poorest of the regions at the time.
He's a very pragmatic person, but always rooted in the people.
He was a pioneer. He had to lay the foundation for this.
Like that, as if he was so, he was in such a hurry that he wanted to do so much.
Nowhere in his region that his feet did not touch, for them to know that somebody is governing, somebody is wants something to do.
Wherever they went and then they found that something was lacking for a community, they encouraged them to, it was an empowerment of the community, so that they left a legacy. And leaving a legacy means that you didn't have oil money, but you were able to try and build universities, give scholarship to people. You picked up the phone and the phone worked. Light, you switched on the light, there was light.
And it was a disciplined man, highly disciplined man.
A hallmark for most observers was the sheer integrity of the administration he ran. There was a clear system of transparent governance, and as an individual, there were no questions or doubts as to his personal integrity. Aside from the assets of office, such as his official car and accommodation, he led a fairly modest existence. He owned a small piece of land at Oguinugu, bought before his appointment as a minister. He subsequently purchased a property at Umuahia with a mortgage loan obtained on competitive terms, repaid monthly from his salary. In a conversation with a colleague who congratulated him on his house at Umuahia, he responded that the bank was the house owner, not him. These words were to ring true a few years later.
So he had that uncommon passion, and he did it selflessly. Of course, the story is common. How he didn't have a house until 1965. He built what is now called Juku Bunker. You know, people will think he built it with Eastern Nigerian money, but the truth is that he borrowed the money from ACB. He took a loan of £20,000. That's the premier of Eastern Nigeria. Had to borrow money to build his first house in Umuahia. £20,000 from ACB. Unfortunately, he didn't live there long. That house was just completed in 1965. He must have spent Christmas there. And then the coup happened in January.
He had a minister of lands, and the whole land in Independence Land was given out to people. But Okpara has no plot there. He was a selfless leader.
Can be captured in a few words: selfless leadership, simply put. He was an altruistic leader. MI Power, as he was also known, was not materialistic at all. He cared more for his followers, for the laird, rather than for himself. He wanted to leave a legacy, a sustainable legacy, and he didn't want it tainted by corruption. In fact, he had a complete disdain for unnecessary acquisition, materialistic wealth.
Truth was that he was an honest man. He was really a nationalist. He didn't make money in the government. He didn't for minister for about 6 years and premier for about 6 years. He was a totally honest man. Unlike the present vandals and criminals and looters we have in government, who enrich themselves. All of us went into government as nationalists. What we went into government was for and with what we can give, what we could give, and not what we could take. That is the difference.
There was a culture there amongst all of them to leave a legacy for the future and to improve the lot of the people that they were leading. That was the prime thing in their minds. It wasn't to acquire wealth.
On the party front, Iheonukara continued Dr. Azikiwe's active encouragement of the party's women activists.
Okay, the women were the women of the NCNC. There was Mrs. Janet Mokelu. There was Mrs. Okoro, Frida Okoro, and she was quite a ferocious woman in the Azata area. She owned her own mini business. And there was Mama Titi, and she was, she had a fish stall in the fish market. And then there was Margaret Tepo. And there was a third lady whose name, because there were three of them that always came together to our house. And when they come, I know that they've come to report someone to the chairman. And of course, the three of them will just arrive, and then they'll go upstairs, and then I know that they're reporting somebody. And then a series of meetings then happens. Like
Margaret Ekpo, Janet Mokelu, so many of them, they are not always remembered, but they were there. In this area, our area, they were there.
On the national platform, however, the years 1962 through 1964 witnessed brewing crisis. The leader of the action group, Chief Obafemi Awolowo, and several of his party members were tried and convicted of treasonable felony in 1962. Awolowo's erstwhile colleague, Chief S.L. Akintola, assumed premiership of the region, after which a rift occurred between both men. The first elections after independence loomed in 1964. On this occasion, the NCNC formed a coalition with the Action Group for the very first time and named the United Progressives Grand Alliance, UPGA, an alliance of which Iheonukara had been a prime proponent, as president of the NCNC.
The Action Group was the official opposition party. Balewa and his people sent Awolowo to prison, the leader of the Action Group. After they sent him to prison, Akintola, who took over the government of Western Region, displaced Awolowo in their party, the Action Group, so making Awolowo's name irrelevant. And so he went to the north to negotiate an alliance with the new Action Group, the faction of the Action Group which he took over, which he started leading when he became premier. He went to Kaduna to negotiate his alliance with the Northern People's Congress, with the Sadana of Sokoto, so that at Lagos, Balewa should eject us, the NCNC, from the alliance. And so, Bisi Onabanjo and myself recommended and formed to the NCNC and Action Group to form the Progressive Grand Alliance. And so Bisi Onabanjo and myself became the coordinators of the alliance. The alliance was, we did not want to be kicked out of the federal government, neither would we want that the Action Group should be destroyed, because that would mean the North ruling the country alone.
This alliance met with some opposition from within the party, once again from Chief Okotiebo.
My dad never believed in party they call it cross-carpeting. But in the case of the UPGA and the formation, it was an alliance between NCNC and Action Group. And don't forget that Action Group was strictly in the opposition against NCNC and NPC, which was the predominant northern party. And my dad refused to join, even when his mentor, Nnamdi Azikiwe, and his great friend, Michael Okpara, were going to join Action Group. He refused. He felt that it was not something that would work because of different philosophy, and he made it very, very clear. And in writing, which I read very well, because I understood a bit of it as a child, but now that I read his records, he actually made a public statement to the NCNC that he should not be a suspect because he will not join UPGA, but that his own staying as NCNC is because he felt that his principles do not agree with that of the Action Group, and so he remained resolute. And he also did tell them that it will not work, but that did not stop communication. So one of the communications I read was telling Nnamdi Azikiwe, Chief Dennis Osadebe, who was the premier of the Midwest region, and Chief Michael Okpara, that they should not listen to rumors and people who want to spoil their relationship by thinking that he has an alliance with the NPC. Even though he has a lot of friends in the NPC, it was for the friendship was either personal or for a good working relationship for building up of the nation.
Yet M.I. Okpara's determination prevailed. UPGA contested the 1964 elections against the Nigerian National Alliance, which comprised the NPC and its main partners, the Nigerian National Democratic Party led by S.L. Akintola. There was no question that the impending elections in the Western region were going to be volatile. The violence between UPGA and NNA supporters started long before the elections, but the campaigns continued. M.I. Okpara indicated his intention to travel to Ibadan to participate in the campaign, but was warned by several of his associates not to undertake what was seen to be a dangerous journey. In his usual way, he insisted on traveling to Ibadan. Background to this is provided by the fact that Chief Awolowo had been incarcerated at the Calabar prison in the eastern region. M.I. Okpara had taken steps to ensure Awolowo's comfort, even housing him in a private residence at night and ensuring all his needs were met as far as was possible. M.I. Okpara had also met with Chief Mrs. Hannah Awolowo after her husband's incarceration and assured her that he would do all he could to ensure her husband's freedom. M.I. Okpara also made sure to provide material support for the family of Chief Awolowo. And while they were not in any way indigent, it was greatly symbolic in a hostile environment for the family at the time created by political opponents to have the moral support of a faithful ally at this time.
Awolowo was serving his imprisonment at Calabar in Eastern region. And so I was personally sent to Calabar to go and make an arrangement. And we made the arrangement that a house of a man from this place was taken over from the man. We asked the man to move away. It was a story building near the prison. So we hired this house. We took the Eastern government took this house, and Awolowo was staying there. And people didn't know that Awolowo was staying in the house. In the daytime, Awolowo will go to prison. He remained in prison. At 4 o'clock, after what they call lock-up in prison, Awolowo will go to just walk across to the place. All the cooks and stewards and chairs and attendants, everybody there, everything was provided by the Eastern government. And that was why he never ate prison food, because he only ate twice a day. He managed to take something in the morning, then the next thing he ate is in the evening. He doesn't eat in the afternoon. He didn't eat in the afternoon. So we took this care of him. Then the Eastern government of Dr. Okpara placed Awolowo's wife on a ministerial salary and were paying her the same salary and allowances and perquisites as regional ministers were paid. She was also issued a car, official car, as the ministers were issued, and her driver maintained by the government at Enugu.
There was moral support between the two parties, of which Mr. Awolowo was now the leading member of the party. Well, not being as if he was keeping her for subsistence. No. When two parties are cooperating towards a goal, there must be moral support for each party. And I understand some people are saying that he was giving Mr. Awolowo some maintenance. No. There was more than moral support of one party with cooperation with the other to fight a common enemy, which was the NPC. And when Awolowo was in somewhere in the east, Okpara was then the premier. That was good rapport with them. That shouldn't be interpreted as if he was giving moral and financial support. No. Financial support can come in as a result of relationship between two parties for election or something. With this Awolowo family, that you are extending it too far. They are not indigent. If there was any support, it would be support for the progress or for the furtherance of the political party.
Emma Okpara arrived in Ibadan, and Chief Akintola's failure to grant him audience was of little consequence to him, as a massive crowd of party supporters welcomed him. He and Chief Mrs. Awolowo led the campaign rally, where he was carried shoulder high by party supporters. Afterwards, he was returned to Enugu without incident.
He, as the chairman of NCNC, toured around the whole country campaigning. But when we came to, and in each of these stores, I was always with him. When we came to Lagos, the tour built for the Western region, that is to Ibadan. The then Premier of the Western region, S.L. Akintola, issued and gazetted a notice that all political rallies are banned. What Dr. Okpara said to his followers, ban or no ban, to the west we must go. We went to Ibadan, the whole of the Western region, went to the government house. Akintola was nowhere to be seen. He signed the visitor's book. Then went to Ogbomoso, his own town, went to his house. He was nowhere to be seen. He signed the visitor's book and carried a successful campaign in Ibadan and in the Western region.
The elections were fraught with irregularities, and UPGA candidates complained of manipulation of the electoral process that saw 30% of the NNA's candidates returned unopposed. Violence erupted in response to the alleged injustice. M.I. Okpara had taken steps to ensure that actual results were broadcast by dispatching his ace broadcaster, Mazi Okono, to cover the Western region elections, which he conducted in his inimitable style.
Then, at that time now, a premier of Eastern region was Dr. M.I. Okpara. Then, Degbenro, who was representing Awolowo, who was already in prison in Calabar, then contacted Okpara and to send him somebody to help them in this broadcast. I was now dispatched to go and do the broadcast in Ibadan. Very risky one. And accepted, I have no choice. So I left Enugu, came to Ibadan for the broadcast, and other broadcasters from other different stations and all that were there. We were taken to the Ministry of Information and given a hall and say, yes, in this hall, what they are going to do was that anywhere the constituency where election was held, then you don't go out, they will be there to receive the result before you go to broadcast and all that kind of thing. So knowing me very well, I smell a rat. I said, hey, this flower, and they want to rig it, you know. By the time the thing reaches there, they can change the figures and all that. I said to myself, I'm not taking line down. So I quietly kept quiet. So after the meeting now, I decided to abscond. Went to Awolowo's house, a Keazor residence of Awolowo. Then the action group who knew I was representing Okpara received me, and I told them, I said, this is what has happened. They say we must be there and receive the result, blah, blah, blah. And I know they want to rig the election. That being the case, I want to establish my own studio right here in Awolowo's library. He has a big library, Awolowo. I want to establish my own studio here and connect it to AMBC Enugu studio. So that whenever the election, the result come out from any constituency, then you, the action group of my people, would now phone me. We had 3 telephones. So they phone me so that we beat them to the game. Immediately if that happens, I'll go on the air before they can send the result to the Ministry of Information, you know. So that in case they want to rig it, they find out, you know, the actual number of actual results has been already broadcast. Then they were very happy. Everybody was very happy. Then I called P&T people. Then they came and installed equipment for me, and connected me to a studio in Enugu. So when the election started now, that thing was worked. Then when the election was concluded in a constituency, they phone me and I pick up. They say, oh, okay, this constituency, this is the result, the action group, this and that. Then I went on the air, bam! I broke that. I said, this is Maso Kono with you in the roving station of Eastern Nigeria Broadcasting Corporation. I said the roving, so they don't know that I'm in our house. So they were looking. So because of it now, the thing was affecting them and said, get to corner. And they say in the roving, looking for a roving man. Not know that I was inside the library where we had our studio, you know. So this went on until the election was over. We beat them to the game. And then I told myself, call for press conference, announce yours before Kintola does anything funny. It was on that note, the thing was done, and bam, bam, bam. The day they were about to now hold the press conference, they invited the media and all that. Then I said to myself, I've completed my job.
Mazi Ukoni was able to broadcast the actual results of the elections in hiding, confounding the attempts of the incumbents to prevent them from being made public. In spite of his gallant efforts, however, the results in favor of the NNA were validated. The silver lining, though, was the experiment in alliance between the NCNC and the AG, one that had never occurred before, and which Dr. Okpara and Action Group chieftains had to all intents and purposes dealt with each other in the utmost good faith, in spite of the eventual outcome. At the national level, the election results pointed once again to an NNA win. For a brief period, Dr. Azikiwe refused as president to accept and pronounce the results, until so compelled, subsequent to a meeting with the General Officer commanding the army, Major General Welby Everard, and others. However, the seeds of conflict had been sown. Violent protests erupted in western Nigeria, and while the NCNC led by Emma Okpara prevailed in rerun elections in the eastern region, there was tension in the air. The year 1966 was ushered in with the eastern region celebrating the opening of the Niger Bridge in the first week of January that year. The prevailing uneasy calm was to be shattered in the early hours of January 15. In summary, a group of young middle-ranking officers led by Majors Emmanuel Ifajuna, Chukwuma Kaduna Nzogu, and Wale Ademoyega attempted an overthrow of the civilian government. Prime Minister Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, the Premier of the North, Sir Ahmadu Bello, and his wife, Premier of the West, Chief Samuel Akintola, and the Minister of Finance, Chief Festus Okotebo, were killed. Also killed were Brigadiers Zachary Memalari, Samuel Ademulegun and his wife, Colonels Kur Mohammed and Arthur Onebwe, as well as Lieutenant Colonels Yakubu Pam and Abogola Gema.
Okay, the 15th of January coup of 1966 was actually a shock to everyone, nonetheless me, because that was my birthday. By the 12th or 13th of that January, the Prime Minister requested that my dad would cut short his leave and return back to Lagos. So all we thought was it would be a short-lived thing and he would join us to continue the family get-together, and it's also time for him to be able to reach out to the communities that he serves. So he didn't come back. The coup happened. The pronouncement of their death was shrouded. It was not like it was announced that they're dead. We were told that they're missing. And so for many months, it was hoping that they will come back. But That didn't happen because his dead body was brought a year after for burial by the military. And the military brought his body to Saple and were arranged for his burial.
M.I. Okpara had been playing host to the visiting head of state of Cyprus, Archbishop Makarios, at the time of the coup, and was in fact accompanying his guests to the airport when they noticed unusual movements by soldiers at the airport. After M.I. Okpara and Sir Kanu Ibiam saw off the state visitor, the soldiers at the airport insisted on riding in the Premier's car back to the State House. However, both M.I. Okpara and his orderly chastised them, which seemed to discourage them. Dr. Okpara and Sir Ibiam by now began to sense danger afoot and returned hastily to their respective residences. On arrival at State House, M.I. Okpara became fully aware of the coup attempt and was spirited out by his staff to safety. The soldiers that had previously attempted to forcefully enter his vehicle arrived State House shortly after his departure. M.I. Okpara was later to realize his good fortune. The vehicle the soldiers had been traveling in had a flat tire en route from the airport, when in fact he had been one of those marked for assassination.
Terrible, terrible feeling and terrible time. You know, the army surrounded the premises. And then at the government house, at that time the coup took place. And they said they had come to kill my husband as they killed Akintola and others. I don't know, God, I think God, as I have said at the beginning, God's hand was on that man. He was young then. He was there. When they surrounded the premises, in order to kill everybody inside. Miraculously, we saw they dispersed. We saw nobody. We saw nobody at all.
There had been a Commonwealth conference in Lagos. And Archbishop Makarios decided to visit Dr. Okpara in Enugu. So he was with him. And yes, one story says they didn't, because of the presence of a foreign head of state, they didn't want to take the chances of killing the head of state of a foreign country. There's the other story, of course, that the people who were to do the coup didn't get there on time. By the time they got themselves ready, it was daybreak. A whole lot of anti-Igbo people, of course, said that there was a conspiracy not to do any coup in Enugu, that the Igbos conspired, which is not true. But no matter whichever happened, I think we thank God for saving his life.
By January 16, the coup attempt had been foiled via the efforts of the GOC of the army, Major General Aguiyi-Ironsi, who eventually assumed office as military head of state on the same day, on receipt of authority for the same from the Senate President, Dr. Nwafor Rizu, acting in the absence of President Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe on leave at this time. M.I. Okpara was, however, soon to face one of the most trying periods of his life up till that point. On resumption of power, the Ironsi regime had ordered the arrest and detention of several politicians. M.I. Okpara was one of those marked for arrest. A large police detachment from Lagos arrived at his family home at Umuegwu and arrested his father, Okpara Asonya, effectively holding him hostage until his son presented himself. Incensed by this, M.I. stormed the police headquarters in Lagos and presented himself, while berating the police for what he described as cowardly and inhumane action. First on March 5, 1966, he was placed in detention, firstly at the Enugu prison and subsequently at the Warri prison. M.I. was grateful to Chief Giwa Osage, the Federal Director of Prisons, for sparing him the humiliation of being held in the region he had ruled as Premier.
And then later on, they came and took him. They came and took him alone with Ibiam. At that time, Ibiam was governor.
He was to remain in detention for 5 months until August 1966, after another set of events.
The Ironsi regime had in May 1966 promulgated the Unification Decree, effectively making Nigeria a unitary state. This, alongside the perceived delay in trying the January 15th coup plotters, sparked riots in the north, and the killings of Eastern Nigerians. There were once again murmurs in the army that soon became loud bursts of gunfire. On July 29, 1966, with the widespread killing of soldiers of Eastern Nigerian origin in several military installations across the country, in a coup led by officers of northern origin. By August 1st, the situation became tragically clear. Major General Ironsi and his host at the time, Colonel Adekunle Fajui, the military governor of the Western region, had been assassinated, and a new head of state, Lieutenant Colonel, later Major General Yakubu Gowon, assumed office on August 1st, 1966.
The Gowon regime ordered the immediate release of detained politicians, one of whom was Dr. Michael Okpara.
At that time, I had become, as I told you earlier, from Sir Megu's insistence, legal advisor to Emeka as military governor of Eastern Nigeria. And I had to deal with Okpara, who was in custody in Warri, I believe it was. And the arrangements for his release after the second coup, Nigerian coup, in July 1966, I was in charge of the arrangements, as it were. And he was released using the instrumentality of his kinsman, Bob Ubwago.
He returned home to Iheonukara, where he was received into the warm embrace of his relieved wife and family.
I remember one of my father's friends came in and said, "Don't worry, the IG is giving instructions that they have to be safe." And the IG at that time was actually a Hausa man. His name is Kamsalem. Yeah, that Kamsalem said that nobody should touch them and that they are safe where they are. And then this chap then said to my mother, "Your husband is probably safer there than in your house. So let him stay there. When the time is right, we'll make arrangement for you to go and visit him in the prison." But that they're being looked after and they're very well treated. When they were released from the police, they all had beards. They all had, because they couldn't shave, and I remember both of them, the pictures. They had beard, long white beard, because they could not shave all the time they were in prison.
The family's ordeal was finally over, at least for a time. A political crisis on the national stage soon escalated. Lieutenant Colonel Emeka Odumegwu, military governor of the Eastern region, refused to recognize the Gowon regime on grounds that the assassination of Major General Ironsi had not been confirmed, and further contending that Brigadier Babafemi Ogundipe, as the most senior officer, ought to have succeeded Ironsi. The impasse escalated with attempts at resolution via a constitutional conference at Lagos in September 1966 and a series of peace conferences at Ibri, Ghana, convened by General Ankara, the military head of state of Ghana. The latter saw an agreement reached from which the Nigerian side subsequently resiled. An economic blockade was imposed after the Eastern Region government ceased the remittance of funds to the federal government. On May 27, 1967, the Eastern Consultative Assembly at Enugu moved for secession of the Eastern Region, and on the same date, the federal government promulgated a state creation decree creating 12 new states, of which 3 new states, the Central Eastern, Rivers, and Southeastern states, were carved from the old Eastern Region. The Republic of Biafra was declared on May 30, 1967. The federal government ordered a police action. A few days later, on July 6, 1967, the Nigerian army began an advance into Biafran territory via its northern borders. The Nigerian Civil War had begun. Iheonukara was once again a witness to these unfolding events. He had been greatly troubled by both coups of 1966 and deplored all the killings which he saw as unnecessary and immoral. In particular, he was distraught by the killing of the Prime Minister and his friend and colleague, Chief Festus Okotiebo. Likewise, he was deeply affected by the pogroms in the north and all the killings that accompanied the July 1966 coup. Still, he kept a distance from public life, quietly observing events from his hometown. However, his sabbatical away from public life soon ended when he was approached shortly after the declaration of Biafra to join the cabinet as a political advisor to Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu. He was tasked with managing the recruitment of soldiers into the Biafran army, a process that had commenced even before the declaration of Biafra. The war progressed, and within the first 4 months, Biafra experienced serious initial setbacks, with Nsukka, Enugu, Bonny, and several other territories lost to the rampaging federal forces. After the fall of Enugu, Biafra relocated its capital to Umuahia, and the Biafran Department of Requisitions and Supplies mandatorily acquired Iheonukara's property in the town as a Biafran state house. Years after the war, this house was acquired by the federal government and today houses the Civil War Museum. Once again, the successive losses suffered by Biafra and the consequential human cost of the war was deeply troubling for Iheonukara. Like all persons of conscience, he had been outraged by the massacre of Easterners before the war, and certainly believed in and defended the right of Biafra to defend itself. But then, the sheer number of deaths of both soldiers, many of whom he had helped recruit, and civilians, was a huge emotional burden to him. Yet, he maintained his resolve in supporting the Biafran war effort. It remained for him a battle for survival of his people. Another area in which he was to carry out significant work on behalf of the Biafran government was in international diplomacy. He led delegations to the Ivorian, Tanzanian, Gabonese, and Zambian governments, and by the end of 1968, the efforts of himself and colleagues like Sir Louis Mbanefo, Dr. Ifegweke, Professor Kenneth Dike, Eni Njoku, and a number of others led to the granting of recognition to Biafra by the said governments. The war nonetheless progressed, with grim consequences for the embattled nation. Biafra continued to lose territory to the Nigerian advance, and by the beginning of 1969, air raids by the Nigerian Air Force racked up civilian casualties. Hunger was widespread, and the sight of kwashiorkor-ravaged children dying daily in their hundreds was commonplace. During these months, Dr. Okpara inevitably experienced the anguish of seeing all of the fruits of the labor of himself and his predecessors in government virtually destroyed before their very eyes. Industries and infrastructure that had taken years and effort to build were largely destroyed in a few months. The proud, vibrant population of the eastern region was largely reduced to starving, desperate, and battled humanity. He could still marvel at the resilience and determination of his people, despite being faced with incredible odds, no question. However, the tragic cul-de-sac into which they had been forced, by no fault of their own, caused him deep and wrenching anguish.
Let's put it this way, everybody had concerns about the survival of Biafra. I think it was a very difficult time for everybody. Dr. Okpara undertook to keep the spirit of civilians alive, high, by relating to them, talking to them, why they should endure all the sufferings because of the prospect of better days ahead. He did that, of course, because he had the credibility. He led a team of, former public office holders who talked, who tried to talk to communities, different communities, and convince them to hold on and to remain committed to the war. So everybody in Biafra was concerned. We were not well equipped, as you know. But I was in the army, and when I was a platoon commander, a platoon made up of 30 people, we had less than 20 rifles. So we went into battle with people who had machetes and, nothing else. And they were able to charge on machine gun nests. Yeah, the exceptional bravery was shown in Biafra. But we were not really equipped to win the war the way we were going on about it.
In the first week of January 1970, as the war encroached upon the new Biafran capital of Owerri, its third in 3 years, the Biafran government began to consider the departure of its head of state. By January 11, 1970, this became a reality. Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu delivered an address stating that he was leaving Biafra to seek for peace. An aircraft was prepared for his departure, and he was accompanied by a number of Biafran officials, including C.C. Mojeku, Ncheyong Akpan, Colonel Alexander Madiebo, Dr. S.J. Kuki, and amongst others, Dr. Michael Okpara. The aircraft took off in the early hours of that morning, and the last sights Okpara would have of his homeland for the next 8 years were the paraffin lights on both sides of the darkened runway as the aircraft took off. An exhausted, unwell, and emotionally drained man postponed his despair by lapsing into deep sleep for the duration of the journey.
His departure had not been an easy one. He'd received information, right or wrong, that he was on the list of those marked for extermination by federal troops. Once informed that he would be on the flight accompanying Ojukwu, he had tried to persuade Mrs. Okpara to accompany him. However, she vehemently refused because 2 of her sons, who had been Biafran combatants, had not been found, and she would not leave until she found them. After all his attempts to plead with her failed, she urged him to leave as she genuinely feared for his life. Most reluctantly, M.I. Okpara departed Biafra. After arriving Ivory Coast on January 11, 1970, the party were hosted by President Felix Houphouët-Boigny. M.I. Okpara, however, informed Ojukwu of his intention to travel to Europe.
This was soon facilitated and he traveled to Germany, where he resided for a time with his younger brother, Dr. Iheonukara Okpara, with whom his 3 daughters and youngest son had been since November 1969. After 2 months of rest and recuperation, greatly assisted by the news from Nigeria that his 2 Biafran combatant sons had been found, he busied himself with a French language course in France. He ultimately decided to return to his primary profession, medicine, but was reminded that his qualifications required additional training to enable him practice in Ireland and the United Kingdom. The now 54-year-old M.I. Okpara was undeterred and was admitted to Trinity College, Dublin, Ireland in September 1970 with the assistance of Arnold Smith, the Commonwealth Secretary General. His studies involved attending lectures with final year undergraduate students and some postgraduate students. His circumstances were so difficult at one stage that he had to do odd jobs just to survive while pursuing his studies. He took a course in pharmacy and qualified as a pharmacist by November 1971. His ultimate target, however, was membership of the Royal College of Physicians. He, however, faced a monumental deficit in funds. He then approached an old friend at the University of Dublin, Professor Gatenby, who secured employment for him at the University of Dublin, where he worked between the years 1972 to 1973. In spite of the humility of his circumstances, he applied himself diligently to his task.
I had known him as the Premier of Eastern Nigeria, as a broadcaster on the ENBC TV then, but the physical contacts were not there. But it was in Dublin, after he had, at the end of the war, my wife and I and my sister-in-law went to see him. In fact, we were the first family that he saw as such from Eastern Nigeria when we went there, because that's what he told us. And I was thoroughly impressed by him, because when he saw us, this was a human being, not the Premier of Eastern Nigeria. He lived in this flat, I think it was about 2 bedrooms and so on. He was working at St. James's Hospital in Dublin. And he went into the kitchen to cook for us. And since I was the only other male there, I offered to go and help. He said, no, that I should go and sit down. And he cooked, and we ate, and he cleared away. It was amazing. We stayed in Dublin at a hotel nearby for about 3 days. We saw him every day, and then we took him to a Christmas party. There's a Christmas party that's organized in a castle in Dublin. It's called the Killarney Castle. And there were meals, there was dancing, there was singing. And he said that was the first time since the end of the war that he had gone out with any party to anywhere. And he thoroughly enjoyed the evening. He enjoyed our stay and said he'd never forget it.
Having saved enough funds, he enrolled at the University of Edinburgh for his specialist training in January 1974. And on January 27, 1975, Dr. Michael Okpara passed the examinations qualifying him for membership of the Royal College of Physicians, 27 years after qualifying as a doctor at the Yaba Higher College, and the fulfillment of a dream deferred since 1952. There was much to celebrate, and he was grateful for the support and prayers of old friends and well-wishers, including the elderly Mrs. Williams, his old school teacher, who called him regularly to encourage him during this period. His beloved wife had visited him in October 1974, ending a most difficult forced separation for this close couple. He was grateful for his wife's stoicism in his absence holding the fort gallantly, providing maternal support for the children, while equally encouraging her husband in his time of need. In spite of the physical separation, the couple had remained deeply connected emotionally, and telephone calls and letters were invaluable channels of communication.
God gave me strength, and the people too prayed for me everywhere. God gave me strength. I was farming. We have farm. I have very big farm. Poultry, piggery, agriculture, farm. They planted everything. I supplied food with pineapple, with everything. I didn't go to sit down and mourn. I worked hard. And at the time too, I had a school of my own at Abaya, which I was also looking after. Even when after the war, everybody went ran helter skelter. Ibrahim was always coming to visit me, he and his wife, his brother. And sometimes they would even lead me to Babangida to beg him to bring back my husband. You know, he was in self-exile for years, 9 years, and I was alone here.
He returned to Trinity College, Dublin in 1975 and worked as a registrar and clinical tutor for the next 3 years. He was recalled to be a highly knowledgeable and well-respected member of staff.
He was practicing as a doctor at St. James's, and I had the privilege of bumping into one of the junior doctors at St. James's, and he was full of admiration for him and actually said that lots of people, that he doesn't behave like a man who was the premier of a place. He doesn't throw his weight around, he doesn't give orders and so on. That a lot of even his senior colleagues relied on his advice in areas of non-clinical issues.
Premier of Eastern Nigeria, gone back to medicine, finished from Edinburgh, come to Dublin to work. I don't even think that most people he worked with in Dublin knew about his background and who he really was and so on.
The people at the University, the medical school, were very friendly and very understanding, and they assigned a couple of mentors to him to assist him and help him, because it must be quite difficult. I'm a doctor myself, and if I put myself in that position of not studying or practicing medicine for many, many years and then having to then go back, you need to have a sort of resilience as a human being to be able, because he could have done something else.
It was like a reorientation.
He had to be reoriented. Medicine had changed a bit, and also the people who were teaching him had not lived such important lives like he had done. So, but he humbled himself and he learned, and he said the people in Edinburgh were very, very gracious and very kind and supported him in a lot of ways and made it possible for him to restart his career in medicine again.
By 1978, several of his associates had been working anxiously behind the scenes to see to his return. Notable amongst these was Dr. Akanu Ibiam, who obtained assurances of his safe return. Iheonukara Okpara soon prepared for return, selling off a small flat he had bought in Dublin and shipping his property back to Nigeria. His journey was scheduled through Germany, where his children were studying. He had been in touch with the Nigerian ambassador to Germany over time. However, shortly before his return, he received a shocking message from the ambassador, saying that the then head of state, Lieutenant General Obasanjo, had instructed him not to return to Nigeria, but to remain in Germany, further stating that should he return to Nigeria, it would be at his own risk. An outraged Iheonukara Okpara voiced his annoyance with this, outlining that he had sold his house and shipped his belongings, and he could not return to Ireland or stay in Germany. He resolved to return to Nigeria, whatever the risks were. Thus, on October 10, he boarded a flight to Lagos. On arrival, he was arrested, detained, and interrogated by the military authorities for 8 days, with their focus being on his political ambitions, the return to civilian rule having been announced at this time.
The Nigerian ambassador was asked to tell him not to come back. So the brave Dr. Okpara said, well, I have packed up and I'm coming home. So he defied them and came home. We were all at the airport to receive him. When he came out of the plane, there were security people to arrest him and all that. So it was decided, okay, fine, what can we do about it? And then I was asked to drive. We didn't want him to go alone in the vehicle of the security people. I had a fairly good car. And I was driving it. 2 security men got in with me, and then he sat in the back. He sat with one in back, one in front, and their car followed us. So we drove to the NSO headquarters at 16 Awolowo Way in Ikoyi, and they detained him.
Mrs. Okpara tirelessly shuttled through government offices seeking his release. She was at one stage asked to prevail on her husband to declare that he would not pursue a political career. However, she refused to even put the proposition to him, saying that he would countenance no such conditions. She was eventually successful on October 18, 1978, when he was released.
So they released him, or they had to release him.
As for his political ambitions, by his own words, all he was interested in was to come, settle down, and pick up the pieces. He was true to his word. He had little interest in the new politics. Chief Awolowo had in fact approached him early on in 1978, dispatching Chief Bisi Onabanjo to enlist him as his vice presidential candidate. Dr. Okpara had responded politely that he was too far removed from the situation at home to make a reasoned response to this request. Dr. and Mrs. Okpara arrived in Enugu from Lagos on October 18, 1978, where a huge crowd gave him the hero's welcome he deserved. From Enugu, they moved in a motorcade to Iheonukara, where an even larger reception awaited him. He settled into his new home, built with a donation of friends and well-wishers, mobilized by the tireless and devoted force of nature that was Mrs. Adamu Okpara. A series of receptions followed for the next 10 days. By one account, over 100,000 people thronged his home at this time, bringing gifts of cows, goats, food and drinks, prayers, or at least an opportunity to see and touch the legend. After a few days, it got a bit too much even for the energetic M.I. Okpara, who was forced to plead with his well-wishers to give him some space to catch his breath. He now had time to take stock of the last few years and reappraise his life's goals. He enjoyed the company of his wife and family members. By now, the Okpara family had grown. With several of his children having their own families, he was now a proud grandfather and busied himself communing with his closest and dearest. His children were all well-educated and settled in their various professions. Nnaweha had studied mechanical engineering in the USA and became a respected specialist in heat transfer. Chinyere studied economics and business administration in Germany. Uzodimma studied microbiology at the University of Nigeria and later became a politician and statesman. Enyinnaya and Ugomwa also trained as medical doctors at the Gießen University in Germany. And the last child, Ijoma, qualified as a dentist at Heidelberg University, also in Germany. The couple were extremely proud of their children and grandchildren, who were a source of immense joy to them.
For M.I. Okpara, what was paramount in his mind was less the now tired tunes of political sloganizing, but the real work he believed he was called for, his medical practice and agriculture. He dreamt of a world-class 105-bed specialist hospital in his hometown. But he first busied himself with establishing a small clinic in his old family house.
And of course, our people were, the people of Umaya were so excited to receive him back home. And what did the doctor do? He opened a small clinic in his father's old house, where he was treating the villagers, literally free of charge, was running the hospital himself.
By early 1979, as the Second Republic politicians jostled for power in the transition period, Dr. Okpara was in his small clinic attending to a wide range of patients, ranging from civil servants to peasant farmers. Those close to him perceived a sense of calm and self-satisfaction about him. He was at last in his comfort zone, where his heart actually lay. Patients trooped to his clinic, not just for treatment, but sometimes just for a friendly chat with this giant of a man in size and spirit, who always had an open door for all.
On December 28, 1979, at a reception of the Iheonukara Welfare Union in Lagos for its illustrious son, the idea for a Michael Okpara Foundation was mooted towards pursuing charitable projects in the fields of medicine, social welfare and education. Thus, the foundation was created with the indefatigable Chief Bob Ogbago as pro tem chairman. The foundation was eventually registered in 1980 with the initial objective of constructing a medical center for its subject. The board plowed ahead diligently and true to its word. On April 4, 1981, the foundation stone of the hospital was laid at Umuegwu by Dr. Alex Ekweme, Nigeria's vice president at the time, accompanied by the then governor of Imo State, Mazi Sam Mbakwe. The event was chaired by Chief G.C. Mbanugo and was attended by a large number of stakeholders from all across the country.
My brother corrected when he came back. He left Nigeria, and after the Civil War, he came back. But with age. When I remember his youth, his golden age, I cried. Okpara, who devoted his life for the cause of Igbo man.
Another subject that occupied Emma Okpara's attention was the movement for a new state out of the existing Imo state. A memorandum to the Constituent Assembly formally signaled this movement in 1978, signed by council chairmen from the old Imo state, as well as traditional rulers from each council. The name Abia was decided upon, having been derived as an acronym from the state's component parts, Aba, Bende, Isiquato, and Afikpo divisions. The movement for Abia State, as it was formerly known, fittingly chose Dr. Emma Okpara as its chairman, and he led a 35-man delegation to the Senate at Lagos on July 3, 1981, when a memorandum for the state's creation was presented to Senate President Dr. Joseph Wyas.
Between 1980 and 1982, being a leader, he saw the need for more Igbo states to be created. The Igbos in the new federation were suffering a disadvantage in the number of states we had. At that time, for instance, the old Western Nigeria had 3 states, while the East had Anambra and Imo states. Dr. Okpara led the people of Imo State to ask for creation of Abia State. What is today Abia State was started as a movement inspired and led by Dr. Okpara.
So as a younger person, after the creation of Abia State, he was foremost in it. So I kept going up to him, all right, yes, that was very, 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 very for a long while. I don't think he lived enough to see the creation of Abia State, but he was agitated for it, We as young people, we followed him.
Alongside these preoccupations, Dr. and Mrs. Okpara were in constant demand at social events all across Nigeria. It appeared the Igbos had been starved of the presence of one of their favorite sons and constantly sought his presence at both formal and social events. In the post-war milieu of Igbo land, a people starved of great role models lost to the war and its aftermath almost subconsciously craved the attention of a man of courage and integrity who they believed represented their ideal, and they were right. Honors for Emma Okpara were not just from his kinsmen. He was awarded an honorary degree of Doctor of Laws, LLD, by the University of Nigeria in 1981, and later appointed Chancellor of the University of Benin on February 5, 1983. By mid-1984, Emma Okpara continued his busy program of activities centered around his clinic and community activities. His routine was, however, shattered by the sad news of the death of his father, Asonye Okpara. While he had been quite advanced in age, it was still a huge blow to the family, and arrangements soon commenced towards according him a befitting funeral. The elaborate traditional ceremonies commenced and were in full swing by the middle of September 1984. After the conclusion of one of the funeral rites, Emma Okpara took time off to relax with a game of chess against his old friend, Bonnae Okelonu, as his wife Adamma played the organ upstairs in the living room. In the middle of the game, he suddenly screamed, clutched his chest, and collapsed. He was rushed to Queen Elizabeth Hospital, Umuahia. However, by 7 p.m. on the same day, he was pronounced dead. The date was Monday, September 17, 1984. He was aged 63 years and 9 months.
The shockwaves of what had just occurred spread around the country. This colossus of a man, who had seemed near invincible and immortal for the best part of his life, whilst wearing his own human frailties proudly, was gone. Could this be true? Thousands literally poured into the family home to find out for themselves, and the tears they shed as they left proved confirmation of their worst fears. MI power, at least in the flesh, was no more. Mrs. Okpara was a picture of strength underneath the deep sorrow she clearly was burdened with. Her husband, her best friend and partner, had departed without even saying a goodbye. In her usual way, she rallied her children and the rest of the family. The children were distraught, but equally found strength as there was much work to be done. His closest friend, Chief Dr. G.C. Mbanugo, racked with the pain at the loss of his friend of over 40 years, reached deep into Igbo philosophy to find the faintest glimmer of consolation, that he passed away in his hometown and not in a foreign land.
How we heard the news was my dad rang to tell us.
Yes.
And the emotion on his voice upset all of us because we both started crying. And it was a very sad thing. And then my dad then said, well, one thing we should all be grateful about is that he came home. And he came home. And we have to be thankful to God that he came home and spent some time at home. And
Before passing.
Because that was, and it was only when he said that I realized that the other option would have been a very sad ending to a great man's life.
It's a proverb in Igbo that yes, that was the term used.
That was the term he used.
Mike was a political hero. His willpower defied fear. His heart applauded his brain to transform him into a brave man. His loyalty to duty urged him to forge ahead until he had achieved his goal. His knowledge scorned compromise with incompatibility. Indeed, he was a worthy example of unparalleled political heroism. Dr. Michael Iheonukara Okpara was laid to rest on February 4, 1985, at a grand and befitting state funeral hosted by Rear Admiral Alison Madueke, military governor of Imo State. The events were attended by thousands of Nigerians, and the stiff salute of Governor Madueke as the last post was played contrasted with the somber, subdued but powerfully poised posture of the last civilian governor of the Eastern region, Dr. Akanu Ibiam, seemingly lost in thought as he bade farewell to his younger colleague and friend. Mrs. Adamma Okpara and her children equally caught a picture of dignified sobriety as they bade farewell to a great man. Michael Iheonukara Okpara was interred at Umegu Okpala, the small town that had produced a giant. In time, a mausoleum was erected at his resting place in a quiet but fitting commemoration. A great man continues to rest here.
He was a dreamer, a visionary, and a practical and pragmatic person in relation to governance, and had achieved a lot. When he now saw that nothing was being done to build on what had been built before, and nothing was being done even to strike out a new path of where to go. So naturally there was a bit of that personality, but like I said, he was a believing Christian. So He said, well, God sent him, he's done his own bit. Maybe that God will send another generation that will put us right. Well, we're still waiting. And I'm sure he's still watching us where he is.
I think we just need to go back. And I think a lot of us are trying to do that. It's difficult to do so without a clear picture of what occurred then. And again, I go back to the issue of scholarship and the absence of scholarship, that leaves us with anecdotes as opposed to study. A leader of Dr. Okpara's stature is someone of whom, in a normal society, there will be volumes that would have been written about him. There would have been multiple explorations of his stuff, of what he did, why he did them, and from there, learning would have emerged. Today, we don't have that. And that tells you who we are as people, because the things that we celebrate define who we are.
Okpara was a very forthright person. His service to Eastern Nigeria, in any case, was a very passionate one.
He was a very, very fearless politician who believed in what he wanted to do and would go out to do it.
His muscular solidarity with his people. As a leader, he represented the hopes and aspirations of Igbo people.
They carried the cause of Igbo man everywhere.
Onyagala Nwanne has left nobody behind. Philosophy of the Igbo community. That's what he built into what they call pragmatic African socialism.
He did exceedingly and exceptionally well. I think he was quite a phenomenon.
Because the ideas and the principles which they stood for, their successors in many cases didn't follow. And that's where we are sitting today.
There's no job or situation that is overwhelming for him.
Okpara gave his best. He revolutionized agriculture. Eastern region was the food basket of the whole country. And food was cheapest in the Eastern region because of Okpara's agro-revolution.
But the little he did showed the direction he wanted the society to go.
He was in a class of his own.
Dr. Okpara was indeed a colossus. He was also a very methodical man.
Look at the life of Dr. Okpara. Look at the life of leaders in that respect, irrespective of whatever party.
There was a culture there amongst all of them to leave a legacy for the future and to improve the lot of the people that they were leading.
There should be a course of study on Okparanomics, which will be entrepreneurial and leadership merged together. It should be like a general study.
So he was one of those people who clearly we can't say was corrupt. He was youthful, he was energetic, he was an intellectual, he was a professional, you know what I mean, and he gave his all.
I mean, the legacy is absolutely towering.
That thing that should be done to help the people do it. Afterwards, they realized that you were right.
He was a moving figure. His words were his bond, and
he was a man known for his integrity,
courage, selflessness, strength in humility.
Was committed to the people, committed to making sure that he gave them a good life.
Michael Okpara is a leader of all times. He is one of our best and the greatest.
Solid, committed activism, putting himself on the line along with other people of his age and his generation, pursuing ideals that they believed in. And you ask yourself, so what do we believe in today in this country? What does a 40 or a 30-year-old believe in today? What is it that you're willing to die for? What is it that you're willing to put yourself on the line for? What is it that you're willing to turn your back on everything that people may offer you? Pragmatic socialism meant making choices that were pragmatic. It involved compromise, but it didn't involve the kind of compromise that was a complete and total capitulation in order to just get things.
I think that these are lessons for all of us to learn in leadership.
On behalf of several generations of his kinsmen and countrymen, we pay tribute today on the centenary celebration of Dr. Michael Iheonukara Okpara, GCON. We pay tribute to Ochieze Adamu Okpara, a matriarch who stood by and with M.I. Okpara through the peaks and troughs of his journey and who equally laid her own markers on the sands of time. Thank you, MI Power. Onye eji eme ọnụ, anya eji afụ ụzọ, ọ bụ ụzọ ndị Igbo, agịlịga nwalụ na nwa, odogwu na onwe ya. History shall always vindicate the just.
Ikenga. Ikenga. Oh, Ikenga. You shall yet see your sunrise, Ikenga. You shall yet see your sunrise. The story goes like this. There lived a breed of men, strong, proud, industrious. But then a just but futile conflict robbed you of your place in history, and you retreated into your shell, defeated and dejected. Sadly today, you are the shadow of your true self. The old man said, where's it? But then today, money has become your king, your God. Yeah, children of a lesser God. Ikenga. Oh, Ikenga. Yes, and the story continues. Knowledge and its pursuit are scorned, and the base has been elevated to the level of God. My message is simple. I am not afraid. Why? Igbo are too great a people to be down forever. We shall rise again.